I just wanted to forget Santino Benedetti, the man who destroyed my life because he believed a lie. For years, I lived far from my own son, carrying a pain no one could see, until, on an ordinary afternoon, a little boy walked into the restaurant where I worked and ran into my arms. He didn't know who I was, but my heart did, and when Santino showed up right after, I understood that the past hadn't come back to ask for forgiveness. It had come back to collect on everything. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Tray That Fell to the Floor. The snow started falling before I even opened the back door of the Verdi, and for a second I stood frozen on the threshold, watching the flakes drift down over the dark river that cut through that part of Chicago. The cold crept in through my coat cuffs, bit at my neck, found the same place it always did, right in the center of my chest, where the pain had had a permanent address for 7 winters. I pushed the door open with my shoulder. The smell of tomato sauce greeted me before any person did. That smell of basil scorched on the edge of the pot, of old bread warming in the oven, of wine opened too early. "Late," said Lena, without looking up from the pad where she was jotting down the afternoon's orders. Her hair was pulled into a crooked bun, red lipstick smudged at one corner of her mouth, and she had the expression of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by anything. 3 minutes. I'm counting because the old man's in a bad mood. The old man's always in a bad mood. Today's worse. I hung my coat on the hook in the hallway, tied my apron around my waist, smoothed my black skirt with my palms. That was the ritual. Hang, tie, smooth. As if each gesture were one more layer between me and the world. A way of putting on the invisible woman I'd learned to be. The Verdi was small. 12 tables in the dining room, a dark wood counter to the left, an open kitchen in the back where Aldo, the owner, shouted in Italian with an accent no one understood anymore. In the right-hand corner, forgotten like a piece of broken furniture, sat the piano. Wood darkened by time, 3 yellowed keys, 1 dead. I had never played it. I passed by it every day and had never reached out a hand. Table 4. Lena tossed the pad onto the counter. Old couple. Always order the same thing. Table 7. 3 men in suits. They look like lawyers or something worse. And that one over there, by the window corner, is new. I looked. A woman sitting alone read a book with both hands, an untouched glass of wine beside her. Nothing that demanded attention. I started circling the dining room the way I circled it every day. Tray on my shoulder, polite smile on my lips, eyes low enough not to invite conversation, high enough not to seem curt. It was a balance that had taken years to learn. The art of existing without being noticed. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a pretty bell. It was an old metal rattle that Aldo had hung up decades ago, and it clanged like tin whenever someone came in from the cold. Every time it sounded, I felt a small twinge. Every single time. Even knowing it couldn't be him. But this time, it was a child. I had my back turned, taking the order at table 4. I heard the door open, the bell rattle, the cold air come in along with 2 voices. One was female, adult, low, with an accent I recognized before I could think. The other was childish, high, excited. "Can I sit by the piano? Can I?" I lifted the pencil from the pad. I stood still for a second. The pencil hung in the air, and closer to the window. "Sweetheart, Mr. Benedetti asked you to stay where I can see you." The tray in my lower hand suddenly felt heavy, as if someone had put a stone inside it. I swallowed slowly. I finished writing down what the couple was ordering. I smiled with the lower part of my face, just my mouth, because the rest no longer responded. When I turned around, I saw the woman in the expensive coat was leading the boy by the hand to table 4, beside the window. She wore black gloves, a silk scarf folded 3 times around her neck, earrings that caught the yellow light of the dining room. The boy, too small for the navy coat he was wearing, let go of her hand the moment he reached the chair and climbed onto the seat on his own, with that rare seriousness of a child who learned early how to behave. I looked at him. I looked at him as if the air had stopped inside my lungs and I needed to use my eyes to breathe. He was a small boy, thin, dark hair combed to the side with the precision of someone who has somebody to comb it. He had his back to me, but even so, I saw it. The chin, the curve of his chin was mine, my grandmother's, before mine. The line I'd seen reflected in every mirror of my life. I took a step back. I felt the edge of the counter against my back and stopped. I kept looking because I couldn't do anything else anymore. The boy turned his face, and the eyes were mine. Not similar, Mine. The same shade of honey scorched at the edges. The same slightly downturned shape at the corner. The same eyebrow that lifted slightly before the other when he observed something. I had seen them for the last time in a fogged-up hospital mirror, 7 years ago, and ever since I had learned not to go looking. I didn't need to look. They had walked in. Allegra. Lena passed by me with a steaming platter. "A menu for table 4, get a move on." I moved. My body moved before I thought to move it. I grabbed 2 leather-bound menus from the counter, tucked a tray under my arm, and crossed the dining room toward the table where the son I'd been forbidden to call mine was sitting. The nanny looked up first. She was in her early 30s, maybe 40, with the kind of cold beauty that you cultivate like someone tending a plant they never water. She smiled. It was a 2-line smile, without any movement of the eyes. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon." My voice came out whole, and I thanked some place in my chest for that. "Can I bring you something to drink while you decide?" "Sparkling water for me, grape juice for the boy." She tapped her nail lightly on the edge of the menu without opening it. "He's allergic to peanuts, to walnuts, to tree nuts. I'll let the kitchen know. Tell them twice, please." I glanced quickly at the boy. He was studying the piano in the corner with the absolute concentration of someone who wasn't listening to the adults' conversation. He had both hands around the empty glass, as if he were already holding something. I noted that without meaning to. I noted the way he held the glass. "Master Benedetti, stay close." The sentence crossed the dining room in the nanny's low voice, directed at the way the boy was leaning, slightly toward the piano. I was standing beside the table when I heard it. I was holding the empty tray between both hands, about to turn toward the kitchen. The tray fell. It hit the plank floor with a sharp crash that sounded like something else falling. Some internal structure. Some wall I had spent 7 years building. I covered the sound with a quick gesture. I bent down, picked up the tray, smiled with the lower part of my mouth while the upper part burned. "Sorry, it slipped. It happens," the nanny said, without really looking at me. I straightened up. I felt the blood return slowly to my face, in small waves. Behind the counter, Aldo grunted something in Italian. Lena passed close to me with narrowed eyes, saying nothing, because Lena never said anything at the wrong time. She saved it for the right time. That was when I noticed the man. He was standing by the door, leaning discreetly against the frame, a black coat buttoned up to his neck, eyes sweeping the dining room in a continuous motion. He hadn't come in after them. He'd come in before, alone, and positioned himself there. I hadn't noticed him because I'd learned not to notice men leaning against door frames. He was one of the family, a man from the Benedetti house. I felt my stomach drop. I brought my hand to my belly by instinct, to the empty place where, for a few very distant months, a breathing that wasn't mine had lived. The man at the door ran his eyes over me without stopping. He didn't recognize me. I was thinner, quieter, my hair now a dull brown pulled into a simple ponytail. The woman I used to be no longer existed. Good thing, I thought. The woman I used to be had taken a different kind of bullet and had spent years surviving it. I went to the kitchen. I wrote down the juice. I wrote down the allergy. I wrote it twice. I told Aldo in the low voice he used when he understood it was serious. I came back to the dining room with the tray steady this time. Glass of sparkling water, glass of grape juice, 2 folded napkins. The boy had left the table. He was standing beside the piano, on his tiptoes, stretching one little hand to touch a single key with one finger. The nanny watched him from a distance without interrupting. I set the glasses on the table. I reached out a hand to call him back. I didn't get to call him. He turned first, saw the glass of juice, and instead of running back, he came walking, slowly, as if he too were studying something. He stopped in front of me. He lifted his face. He had my eyes 8 inches from my chest. "You look sad," he said, with the absolute clarity that children use to say what no one else would dare. Sad like someone who misses home. The tray in my hand trembled. I held on. I gripped my fingers around the cold metal until the trembling passed. I swallowed. I felt a tear forming behind my right eye and pushed it back inside with the strength of 7 years of practice. "Well, I'll bring the menu," I answered. "Do you have a home?" "I do. But is it far?" I looked at him. I wanted to kneel down right there, on the plank floor of the Verdi, in the middle of the dining room, in front of the man leaning against the door and the woman in black gloves and the old Italian in the back, and say that my home was in front of my eyes for the first time in 7 years, that he was my home, that I had never had any other. I didn't kneel down. I smiled with the lower part of my face. "I'll bring the menu," I repeated. He accepted it, the way children accept what adults repeat. He went back to the chair on his tiptoes, with that solemn posture of someone who knows he's being watched. I went to the counter. I set the tray down. I dug both hands into the wood and breathed once, twice. Behind me, I heard the nanny laugh softly at something the boy said. It was a short, dry laugh, closed off at the corners. When I turned to grab the menus, I caught her reflection in the glass of the refrigerator. She was looking at me. She wasn't looking at the boy. She was looking at me, and at the corner of her mouth there was a smile too small to be friendly, too thin to be distraction, too precise to be by chance. I grabbed the menus. I pressed them to my chest. I walked back to table 4 with steady legs and a heart already broken into pieces too small to be counted. Chapter 2. The Song She Should Never Sing. He came back on Wednesday. He came back on Thursday too. And on each of those afternoons, I woke with the feeling of having slept on top of glass, careful not to cut myself on my own thoughts. I'd put on the apron, smooth the skirt, cross the Verdi's dining room, and pretend to Lena, to Aldo, to the man leaning against the doorframe, and most of all to myself, that everything was in its place. Nothing was in its place. On Wednesday, Emilio came in pulling the nanny by the hand. I knew his name because she repeated it twice, always low, always with that too small smile. "Emilio, don't run. Emilio, sit properly." The boy crossed the dining room before she could finish the second sentence, and came over to where I was, behind the counter, folding napkins for dinner. He rested his elbows on the dark wood. He came exactly to the height of the counter, his chin on the edge. "Do you know how to play piano?" he asked. I looked at the piano in the corner, the 3 yellowed keys, the dead one. "A little. Will you play a song? Now, now." The nanny appeared behind him, her hand resting on the boy's shoulder with a firmness that wasn't affection. "Emilio, let the lady work." "But she said she knows how." "The lady is busy." "I'm not," I said, before I could think. The nanny's eyes lifted to me. They were gray eyes, without temperature, the kind that always seemed to be measuring the room instead of occupying it. I held her gaze for the first time. I didn't back down. I smiled with the lower part of my mouth. "If Aldo lets me, and I'm going to ask him right now, I can play just one for the boy." She took her time answering. When she answered, it was a movement of the chin, a minimal nod, like someone granting something they know they'll collect on later. I wiped my hands on the apron. I crossed the dining room on legs that no longer belonged to me. Aldo, from the back, shouted something in Italian that I translated as permission or threat. It made no difference. I sat on the bench. The piano was out of tune. I knew it the moment I rested my fingers without playing, by the way the wood responded to the weight, by the very faint sound of the inner structure settling into the warmth of another hand after so long. I hadn't played in far longer than could be explained. My hands knew. My hands always knew. Emilio sat on the floor, at the end of the bench, as if it were the most natural place in the world. I played. It was a short, simple piece, my grandmother's, spaced out notes, a gentle melody, the kind you teach a child who doesn't yet know how to use both hands. It wasn't the song. That one I wouldn't play there in the open dining room, in the yellow light of the bulbs, in front of the gray-eyed woman. That one stayed locked away. When I finished, Emilio clapped twice, slowly, with that absurd seriousness of his. "Why don't you smile with your eyes?" he asked. I looked down, at the keyboard, at the dead key, which had stayed silent at the end of the last musical phrase. "You ask a lot of questions. My nanny said that yesterday. She's right, but you didn't answer." I smiled, this time with the upper part too, just for him. It was a small smile, but a whole one. Maybe I forgot how. He nodded, serious, as if the answer made sense. He got up from the floor, leaned against the bench, rested his shoulder against mine. It was a light touch, the touch of a child who still measures other bodies against his own. I didn't move. I felt his small weight through the fabric, and the weight in my chest rose to my throat and stopped there. "Emilio." The nanny's voice came from the other side of the dining room. "Table." He went back. I closed the piano lid without looking at her. On Thursday, he brought a drawing. It was a house of crooked bricks, with a big sun in the corner, 3 windows, and a figure at the door holding what looked like a glass. The figure had hair pulled into a ponytail, and an apron. "Is that me?" I asked, pretending I hadn't understood. "You? Where's the house?" "I don't know." He shrugged one shoulder. "It's a house I made up." I folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into my apron pocket. Later, when no one was watching, I would place it between the pages of a book I'd been carrying in my bag for years for no reason. I'd found the reason. He leaned over the counter. Can you sing? Sing? Today, instead of playing, I don't sing. Why? Because I don't. But you breathe like someone who sings. My violin teacher says that some people breathe like someone who sings. I looked at him. I looked with all the clarity that 7 years of silence had given me. I looked for a long time, without disguise, and he held my gaze with that intriguing calm of children who haven't yet learned that looking deep into adults is a dangerous gesture. I'll sing softly, I said. Just one. I took him to the piano corner. The nanny, at the table, looked up from her phone. She didn't object. She just watched. I didn't play. I rested one hand on the closed wood of the instrument and left the other on the boy's small shoulder, the way you hold a child you want close without allowing yourself to embrace. And I sang. I sang softly, in a thread of voice, the song, the same one, the one I'd memorized when I didn't even know I needed to memorize it, in a room of the mansion from which I was torn away, with one hand on the belly that was still growing. The melody came out slow, my breath almost stopping between the notes, the way you sing to a baby sleeping inside your body. Emilio closed his eyes. He didn't fall asleep, of course. He was standing, but he closed his eyes, and for 2 whole seconds it seemed like he'd entered a place he'd been before, and couldn't remember how. When I finished, he opened his eyes slowly. I know that one. You don't. I do too. From where? He shrugged his small shoulders. From somewhere. He tilted his head. Maybe you sing the same as someone who sang. It was at that exact instant that I heard the nanny's chair scrape against the floor. She got up unhurriedly, without a sound, and crossed the dining room in our direction with the smile on its usual minimal line. When she reached the piano, she stopped half a meter from me. She studied my face for as long as it took for me to understand that she had seen everything. Emilio, she said, without looking at the boy. Let's go. But I didn't finish my juice. Let's go. He looked at me. I smiled with the lower part of my mouth. He took her hand and went. On the way to the door, I heard the nanny murmur to herself, too low for her to know I heard, "The lady sings well." It wasn't a compliment. It was a note, like someone putting a name on a list they hadn't yet decided what to do with. They left. The bell rattled. The cold air came in. Lena appeared at my side seconds later, drying a glass with a cloth that had already dried 3 glasses before. Allegra, don't ask. I didn't ask. You're about to ask. I am, but I'm not asking. She looked at the piano. She looked at me. She didn't ask. She tapped the cloth lightly on my shoulder and went back to the counter. The bell rang again. It was late Thursday afternoon. The yellow light of the bulbs was at its peak, and outside that blue-gray darkness was beginning to gather, the kind that precedes night in Chicago in winter. I was still standing beside the piano, my hand on the closed wood, when I heard the footsteps. They weren't the nanny's footsteps returning. They weren't a child's footsteps. They were heavy, calm, spaced-out steps, the kind that belonged to someone who never had to hurry in life. I lifted my face, and he was there. 7 years. It was the exact span between the last time I'd seen that face and this second. Santino Benedetti had come through the door of the Verdi with his dark coat buttoned up to his neck, snow on his shoulders, his dark hair painted white on top by the flakes that hadn't yet melted. He had Emilio in his arms. The boy was curled up against his neck, as if it were the most natural place in the world, and maybe it was. Santino saw me. It took him 3 seconds to believe it. I watched the 3 seconds pass across his face. I watched his head tilt slightly, watched his jaw lock, watched his dark eyes travel from my hair down to the apron tied at my waist, from the apron to the name embroidered in small letters on the pocket, from the name back to my face. I watched his breathing stop and start again. I watched his big hand press lightly against his son's back, in a gesture he probably didn't realize he was making. I didn't move. I still had my hand on the wood of the piano. I felt, without needing to look down, the closed lid under my palm, and it was that wood that kept me standing. Emilio lifted his head from his father's shoulder and saw me too. He smiled. "Dad," he said, with the simple joy of someone showing off a toy. "This is my favorite friend." Santino didn't answer his son. He kept looking at me. Aldo, from the kitchen, stopped shouting in Italian. Lena, behind the counter, stopped drying glasses. The man leaning against the doorframe, who had come in before his boss and positioned himself discreetly in the corner, looked up for the first time in 3 afternoons and stared at me in a very different way, the way of someone who had just done a calculation that didn't add up. Santino crossed the dining room slowly, Emilio still in his arms, and stopped a meter from me. The boy looked from his father to me, and from his father to me, curious. "Allegra," Santino said. It was a single word. It carried the weight of 7 years. "Mr. Benedetti." His voice dropped in tone, too low for the boy to hear, loud enough that I couldn't pretend. "You shouldn't have shown up." I looked at the apron. I looked at the embroidered name. I looked at his son in his arms. I looked at his face, which had aged 7 years in the worst way possible, on the inside, without leaving a mark on the outside. "I wasn't the one who showed up," I answered. He held Emilio a little tighter. The boy, feeling the squeeze, shifted in his arms. Santino turned his face toward the door, then turned back to me again. His dark eyes rested on mine for one intolerable second. Then he left. He walked to the door without saying another word, his son in his arms, and his gaze fixed on me over the boy's shoulder. Before crossing the threshold, he stopped. He looked at me one more time. The man at the doorframe was already outside, holding the door open, and he was gone. The bell rattled for the last time. I stood beside the piano with my hand still on the closed wood. Lena didn't move behind the counter. Aldo went back to shouting softly in the kitchen, maybe out of respect, maybe out of something else. I took the drawing from my apron pocket. I unfolded it. The house of crooked bricks. The sun in the corner. The figure with the ponytail at the door. I folded it again, more carefully this time, and put it away. Outside, I heard a car door close, then another, then the engine. I knew, without needing to see, that Santino Benedetti was sitting in the back seat, with his son pressed to his chest, looking at the front of the Verdi through the car window, and that for the first time in 7 years, he had no control over what was going to happen next. Neither did I. Chapter 3. Crisis in the Wrong Lap. Friday night. The Verdi was full the way it only gets on a night of stubborn snow. People coming in from the cold with their coats flecked with white, windows fogged from the heat of the kitchen, the smell of melted butter clinging to the air. I was carrying a platter of pasta to table 6 when the doorbell rang again, and before I even looked, I already knew. I knew from the silence that opened up for 2 seconds, knew from the way the air in the dining room shifted weight. Emilio came in first, blue coat down to his knees, a crooked beanie on his head. The nanny came behind, sentence ready on her lips, scolding him softly for having run on the sidewalk. "You know you can't run on the ice," she said, fixing the boy's beanie as if adjusting that wool gave her some kind of ownership. I was already beginning to contest without saying a word. "Sit down." "I'm just going to the car to get something." Emilio nodded, the way overly polite children nod. She left. The bell rang again when the door slammed. It was only at that moment that he saw me. "Allegra," he said, like someone reuniting with a familiar person after a trip. I set the platter down on table 6 and cut through the aisle of tables to his. The wood floor creaked at 2 specific spots, and I had already memorized which ones. I sat in the chair across from the boy without asking if I could. "Did you eat today?" I asked. "Bread at school." "Bread and what?" he thought. He took off his beanie. His hair stood up in every direction. "Bread." I almost laughed. "I didn't. I'll bring you some broth. Nice and warm. How does that sound?" "Okay." I got up. I crossed the dining room to the kitchen. Lena was at the counter, leaning on her elbows, watching the scene through the doorway. She raised an eyebrow when I passed. "Broth from the pot in the corner." I said only, "The weak one. The weak one," she repeated, without taking her eyes off my face. "Like you." I ignored her. I served the bowl. I came back. I set the broth in front of Emilio and sat down again, one elbow on the corner of the table, my apron crumpling against my leg. It was in that interval that he ate what he shouldn't have. Ever since he'd sat down, I'd been watching out of the corner of my eye the little basket of assorted breads on the neighboring table, the kind Aldo insisted on putting out as a courtesy at every table on a busy night. I didn't think twice about it. The boy at the next table dropped a piece on the floor, between the 2 tables, and Emilio leaned over before I could open my mouth, picked up the bread, and took a small bite. Walnut bread. I saw the piece of walnut on the edge of the crust the second his spoon settled back into the bowl. "Emilio," I said, voice controlled, hand already reaching out to take the bread. "No." He looked at me. He smiled slightly, not understanding. He swallowed. In 3 breaths, his face changed. The skin of his neck went red in blotches. He brought his hand to his throat the way children do when they don't yet know how to name what's happening. He coughed once. His eyes filled with water. I got up so fast the chair hit the wall behind me. "Lena," I shouted. "The nanny's bag. It's in her stroller, the blue one. Get it. Now." There was no argument. Lena dropped the cloth and ran out the door before I even finished the sentence. I picked Emilio up in my arms. He was light, too light for the 6 years he was, and his head fell against my shoulder with a trust that cut me in half. I crossed the dining room with him like that, crossed the swinging kitchen door, took him to the back where the old piano slept under a gray cloth. "Kit," I said to Aldo, without needing to explain anything. "Epinephrine, if there's any. Call the paramedics. Tell them it's a child, walnut allergy, 6 years old." He didn't ask questions. He grabbed the phone. I sat on the piano bench with Emilio in my lap. His breathing was getting shallow, the kind that scares anyone who's never seen it, and I'd seen too much of it in dreams in which I held a child they wouldn't let me hold. I rested my open hand on his chest. I felt his heart beating too fast under his shirt. "Look at me," I said. "Look here. Breathe with me, deep. Let it out slowly." Again, he tried. He coughed. His eyes pleaded for help in a way that no adult in that restaurant could have endured if they'd stopped to look. And then, without thinking, I sang. It was the same melody, the same one I'd sung the afternoon before, the same one I sang with my palm flat against my belly, months before the hospital bed that no one let me leave my own way. I sang softly, close to his temple, my chin resting against his hair. Lena appeared, running, with the blue bag. "I think this is it," she said, already opening it, and dumped the contents on the floor without ceremony. I found the pen right away. I took off the cap, pressed it into his thigh over his thick pants, held it for the time written on the label. He flinched. I settled his head better against my shoulder and started singing again. His breathing loosened within 2 minutes. It wasn't immediate. It never is. But it loosened. The doorbell rang. I didn't hear it. I heard the footsteps. Santino came into the back without asking permission. He came through the kitchen door, came almost running, and stopped 3 steps before reaching the piano bench. I didn't lift my face. I kept singing. I felt, more than saw, the instant he realized what he was seeing. His son quieted against my chest, the low melody between us, his hand rising and falling to the rhythm of my breathing because I had placed his palm on top of my own hand. "The way you teach a child to feel the air come back." Santino said nothing. I finally lifted my eyes. He stood there with his coat open, snow melting on his shoulders, his hand paralyzed in the air as if he'd forgotten what he was going to do with it. His face was that of a man who had just heard a melody passing through a wall. Aldo cut through the silence from the back of the kitchen, phone still in his hand. "Paramedics in 7 minutes." Santino nodded once without looking at him. He took a step, another. "Give him back," he said, and his voice came out hoarse in a way he hadn't intended. I looked at the boy sleeping from exhaustion in my lap. I looked back at Santino. "Do you really want to take him out of here right now?" He didn't answer. He came up to the bench, crouched down, and instead of taking Emilio from my hands, he rested his fingers on the boy's knee. That was all. His fingers on his son's knee, his face half a hand's width from mine, his breath meeting mine at some point between us where too much was still left unsaid. "I'm not giving him back," I murmured. "Not while he's like this." Santino closed his eyes for a second. "Okay," he said. It was the first gentle syllable I'd heard from him in 7 years. The paramedic arrived. He worked fast. Emilio woke up a little, whimpered softly, let them strap an oxygen mask onto his little face. Santino was on one side of him. I was on the other. At no point did my hand leave the boy's hand. At no point did his touch mine. When they took Emilio, Santino went after him. Before leaving, he stopped at the kitchen door. He didn't turn around completely, just enough for me to see his profile against the light of the dining room. "Thank you," he said, and he left without waiting for an answer. I sat on the piano bench longer than I should have. The lid was open. I rested my fingers on some random key, pressed slowly, without sound. Lena appeared beside me at some point, I didn't know when, and crouched down in front of me on the floor, like someone preparing to wait until the other person speaks. I didn't speak that night. I spoke the next morning. My apartment was above a neighborhood laundromat, 2 flights of narrow stairs, a single window, a living room kitchen attached to a bedroom that barely fit the bed. Lena came up without warning with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag. "Bread," she said, setting the bag on the little table. "No walnuts. I learned yesterday." I sat on the couch with the cup between my hands. "Lena, I'm not asking." She raised her palm. "I'll talk. You listen, then you decide whether or not to tell me. I laughed once. Tired. Okay. That man, she began, sitting on the other side of the couch. He came into the Verde yesterday like someone walking into a house that was his a long time ago, and nobody told him to give back the key. She blew on her coffee. And the boy sings your song, and you half faint when he comes in. And the nanny looks at you like she found a bug in her soup. Lena, you know the boy's father. I looked at the steam rising from the cup. I didn't answer for a while. I do. She waited. Another sip. I knew him before the boy existed, I said. And the boy exists because of me. Lena didn't ask if I meant what it seemed like I meant. She just closed her eyes for 2 seconds and swore softly in Italian, the way she only does when she's angry enough to need to use her grandmother's language. Are you okay? She asked. No. Is there somebody who needs a beating? Several. She drank more coffee. I'm going to go down and open the restaurant, she said, after a while. You come when you can. If you don't come, I'll invent the flu. She got up. Before reaching the door, she stopped. Allegra. Yes. That thing you sang yesterday. She rested her hand on the doorframe. I'd never heard it, but the boy heard it. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understood. She left. I closed my eyes. I put the cup on the little table. I stayed motionless on the couch for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. Later, much later, piecing together the contradictions she herself would let slip, I would picture the nanny that same morning, in some corner of Chicago, with Emilio asleep near her, not as a scene I saw, but as a scene I assembled in my head afterward, when I needed to understand. And what I assembled was a hand without affection, only inventory. I went back to the Verde in the afternoon. Lena didn't ask questions. I worked. I cleared tables. I took orders. I didn't let myself think. That was when the delivery boy came in. A young guy, soaked beanie, envelope in his hand. For Allegra Toscano, he read, and looked up. Is that you? It's me. I handed over the tip. He left. The envelope was plain, thick paper, no return address. I opened it right there, standing, near the window. Inside, a single card. Firm handwriting, slightly slanted to the right. Strokes I had known in the margins of books 7 years before. An address, a time, and, underneath, 3 words. Come, please. I held the card in my hand for a while. Outside, across the street, a black car was not parked yet, but it would be, in a few hours. I already knew, before even knowing. Chapter 4. The Name That Was Always Missing. Sunday. I didn't go to the address, not at the appointed time, not in the 2 hours that followed. Lena passed through the kitchen 3 times pretending to look for things, and on the 3rd, she looked at me in a way that asked, in silence, for me to do something. I didn't. I washed glasses. I dried. I stacked. It was Sunday. The Verde only opened at noon, and I wanted to stay among the dishes longer than that man wanted to wait for me. The apron smelled of coffee and lemon dish soap, and there was something comforting in that simple smell, in the way it asked nothing of me beyond staying in motion. What I didn't know, at that moment, was that he wasn't waiting for me yet either. I found out later, from Bruno, how the morning had gone in Santino's office. Bruno had come in without knocking. He was one of the few people in the world to whom that was allowed. He'd set a gray folder on the desk, stepped back, crossed his arms in front of Santino. The room was too cold because of a window he'd been forgetting to close since September, and the light came in at an angle, slicing the wood of the floor into strips he stared at when he didn't want to look at anything else. The lady didn't come, he said, in that economical voice of his. I know, and you're not going after her. No, he raised an eyebrow slightly. That was for Bruno, the equivalent of a half-hour speech. I pushed the folder aside without opening it. 7 years ago, I had closed another one exactly like it, and I closed it with the certainty of a man who never doubts. That night, I put my mother's ring in an envelope, gave it to a driver, and had it delivered to the home of a pregnant woman I had just sworn never to see again. That was the kind of man I was. That was the kind of man I swore to be for the rest of my life. I wasn't anymore. Bruno, I said, reopen everything. He didn't ask for an explanation. Everything what? Specifically, the evidence of the betrayal. All of it. The account in her name, the recording, the messages, the trail of the money, who signed each paper, who had access, who was close that month. I want a report in 48 hours. Bruno looked at the gray folder he'd brought. There was something in his face, not exactly surprise, more an old recognition, like someone who'd heard that question in his own head for years and was finally hearing it out loud. I thought you were going to ask me that 7 years ago, boss, he said, without irony now. I did. I gave myself some time. Then I gave up. Ask again. I already did. He took the folder back, opened it in front of me, turned the first page toward me. It was a copy of the banking activity for the account opened in her name. Bruno had underlined the date and time of the opening with pencil, with that firm pressure that was his mark on any document he considered important. 2:17 p.m. Thursday, he pointed. The lady taught piano lessons until 3 p.m. That winter. Always. There were no exceptions. I looked at the underlined number longer than I needed to. The time stood there in front of me like an accusation that took 7 years to find the right address. Who else knew about that, Bruno? He stared at me. Whoever needed to know. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Tancredi, that same Sunday, was in a room 2 doors down from ours. He'd asked to speak with Santino. An urgent matter, he said. He always said. Santino made Bruno leave through the side door, cross the hallway, and enter the room where his cousin was waiting. He sent word that he'd see him in half an hour. In half an hour, Tancredi scheduled another meeting at a strange time, with a man he shouldn't have known anymore, and Bruno wrote down the name. That was how, in silence, the Sunday ended. Monday. I went to the Verdi in the morning, served breakfast to 3 regular tables, washed the floor of the entrance because someone had come in with a muddy soul and no one else had time. The restaurant had that start-of-the-week silence I'd learned to like, the kind of silence that asks nothing, that simply exists around whoever inhabits it. Lena watched me out of the corner of her eye. She didn't comment on the card. She didn't comment on Sunday. I thanked her in silence. In the afternoon, the delivery boy showed up again. The same beanie, another envelope. This time, inside, there was no address. There was a single line. I'm still here. Whenever you can. No set time. I stood looking at those 3 short sentences too long. They were the words of a man who had learned, at some point between yesterday and today, that forcing a door only works when there's no one on the other side wanting to keep it closed. Lena passed behind me, read over my shoulder without disguise. This one learns fast, she murmured. For a man who took 7 years. I folded the card and put it in my apron pocket. I felt the paper against my fingertips for the rest of the shift, firm and discreet, like a decision that wasn't yet ready to become action. I didn't go that day either, but I began to know, inside myself, that I would. That night, in a room I didn't know but that I learned to draw from memory afterward. What needed to happen happened without me. I reconstructed that moment much later, from Bruno's words and from Santino's silences, and I tell it now, as it was told to me. The room was on the 2nd floor of an old house downtown, near the church his grandmother attended until she died. The hallway smelled of old wood and cold wax, and the frames on the walls held the faces of men who made decisions whose consequences I inherited. Don Marzio Pavoni arrived first, as always, and took his place at the head of the table without asking anyone if he could. 3 captains came in next. Bruno came in last, with the gray folder under his arm, and the expression of someone about to carry out a job with no pleasure whatsoever. Tancredi came in thinking he'd been summoned to talk about a transport route. "Sit down, cousin," I said. He sat. He looked around. He didn't like what he saw. Don Marzio raised his hand slowly. He was 82 years old, and his fingers trembled a little, but the whole room waited. "Bruno," the old man said. "Present." Bruno opened the folder. He didn't make a speech. He went item by item, with the dry precision of someone who believes the truth needs no ornament to convince. The account in Allegra Toscano's name, opened on a Thursday at 2:17 p.m., at a branch she had never entered, without her biometric signature and without her physical presence, with a correspondence address registered to an apartment that belonged to a man who did occasional work for Tancredi. The recording supposedly made by Allegra, analyzed by a technician hired by Bruno from outside the family, with audible cuts at 4 points and a breathing pattern that did not belong to her voice. It belonged to a collage of 2 earlier statements, captured at different moments. The messages exchanged with the supposed buyer of the information, sent from IPs that, cross-referenced, all led to 3 addresses. 2 of those addresses were properties registered to a shell company controlled by Tancredi. The 3rd was his country house. Bruno closed the folder. He sat down. Tancredi lifted his chin. He tried to laugh. It was a short laugh, the kind that comes from a man who's losing and hasn't yet decided whether to admit it. "All of this can be explained," he began. "Explain it?" said Don Marzio. "Here, now, take your time." Tancredi tried. He talked about coincidences. He talked about disloyal employees who used IPs without authorization. He talked about the bank branch as if I hadn't, the night before, dined with the manager of that very branch. He stumbled over the order of the dates twice. He stumbled over the names of 2 people he shouldn't have known. Don Marzio let him talk until he wore himself out. When the silence finally fell over the table, heavy and inevitable like accumulated snow, the old man looked at me. Santino, yes, he is your family. It is your decision. I looked at Tancredi. I looked at the ring on my own finger, olive branch over crossed dagger, and I thought of the night I had sent my mother's ring in an envelope, and of Allegra's face when she heard from me, for the first time, that she would not go near her son. I thought there was a specific kind of cowardice that disguises itself as certainty, and that I had lived inside it for 7 years without noticing the smell. Tancredi Benedetti, I said, and my voice came out lower than I intended. Loses his rank, loses his protection, loses the name. He went pale. Santino, it ends here, I said. Don Marzio struck the table once, lightly, with his palm. It was enough. The captains rose. Bruno rose. Tancredi was removed from the room without anyone having to lay a hand on him. It was enough for 2 men to open the door and wait. When the last of them left, I was alone. Bruno told me, weeks later, that Santino stayed alone in the room when everyone left, that he sat staring at his own ring, turning it slowly with his thumb, that at that instant, Bruno was sure of it from the quality of his silence. Santino understood that discovering the truth wasn't half the work. It was only the beginning of what couldn't be fixed. He left before anyone could see him thinking. Tuesday morning, in the Verdi's kitchen, I was chopping onions for the day's broth and trying not to cry for the banal reason of someone chopping onions. The light came in through the small window above the sink, that winter light that warms nothing and only exists to remind you that the sun is there, just too far away. The restaurant phone rang. Lena answered. She covered the mouthpiece with her hand and looked at me. "It's for you," she said, and handed me the phone without comment. It was Bruno. I didn't know his voice, but I knew the manner of that kind of man's voice, contained, without ornaments, built to deliver information, without leaving room for unnecessary questions. "Ms. Toscano?" "Yes. I'm from Mr. Benedetti's household. He asked me to deliver 1 sentence. Just that." I waited. "He has learned the truth. All of it. Mr. Benedetti asked that you know before anyone else." The line cut off. I rested the phone on the hook. I leaned against the sink. I closed my eyes and stayed like that for a stretch of time I couldn't measure, my wet hands on the cold steel of the sink and the knife still on the counter and the smell of raw onion in the air. I wanted to feel something that resembled victory. That was what was expected of me, in some version of the story in which I was more whole. I didn't feel it. I felt a great exhaustion, the kind that 7 years keep tucked beneath the stomach, and that, when it finally rises, doesn't arrive as relief. It arrives as the weight of everything that was uselessly carried. Lena came over to the sink. She said nothing. She put her hand between my shoulder blades and held it there, firm, the way only someone with a lot of practice at keeping people standing knows how to do. "Breathe," she murmured, after a while. "Breathe, because I've seen women get better just from breathing." I laughed. It was a low, breathless laugh, but it was a laugh, the kind that comes from a deep place, from the same place where the pain lives, and that for that reason hurts a little as it passes. Through the kitchen window, across the street, a black car stopped at the curb. I didn't see who got out. No one got out. The car just sat there, parked, engine off, its tinted windows returning the gray light of the street back to the street, impassive like a presence that doesn't need to announce anything to make itself felt. I knew who it was. I dried my hands on the apron. I straightened the cloth calmly, with that artificial calm the body learns to manufacture when the real emotion is too big to fit in the available space. I looked at Lena. "I'll be back," I said. "Okay," she said. "I've got the kitchen." I crossed the dining room with slow steps. Through the fogged glass of the door, I saw the dark silhouette of the car across the street, not moving. I touched the handle. I hesitated with my cold palm on the metal. That was when the car finally opened a door. Chapter 5. No knees, no lies. The door of the black car opened at the exact moment Lena passed behind me with an empty tray and murmured that, if I needed an excuse to run to the kitchen, All I had to do was say so. I didn't run. I stood behind the counter, the dish towel folded between my fingers, watching the dark shoe step onto the wet sidewalk across the street. It was Tuesday. It had been raining since dawn, a thin winter rain that cut through the old snow at the corners and left the Verdi's windows fogged on the inside. The dining room was almost empty. 2 customers at the back table, an old woman reading the newspaper near the door, the smell of tomato sauce coming from the kitchen, as if the whole house were breathing slowly. Santino crossed the street alone. Without the dark overcoat I recognized even from a distance. He wore only a simpler coat, collar turned up, hands empty, no bodyguard behind him. Bruno had stayed inside the vehicle, hands on the wheel, gaze fixed on the dashboard like someone giving privacy by feigning distraction. The Verdi's door opened. The bell rang. I felt the air change. He turned to me. He took off his coat slowly and hung it on the rack near the entrance, like anyone would, as if that were the most natural thing in the world, as if he hadn't taken 7 years from me all at once. Lena passed by again, this time with an eyebrow raised so high it seemed to hold up the ceiling, and disappeared through the back without saying anything. I thanked her in silence for having learned to leave when she needed to. Santino came up to the counter. He stopped 2 steps away. He kept his hands at his sides. He didn't ask to sit. He waited for me to lift my gaze. "Allegra," he said. The voice was the same as always, low, with that calculated control, but something was missing underneath. It was the weight. The man in front of me was lighter, more tired, with the dark circles of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Corner table," I answered. It wasn't an invitation. It was a practical order. I pointed with my chin and came around the counter, drying my hand on my apron. He followed me without saying anything. He sat where I indicated, his back to the dining room, facing the exposed brick wall. It was the place where customers came to finish arguments, drink a long coffee. It had no view. That was exactly what I wanted. I sat on the other side of the table. I placed the folded cloth between us. "I'm listening." Santino took a deep breath. He didn't dramatize. He kept his hands resting on the table, open, palms facing me like someone showing he carries nothing. "I was deceived," he began, "by my own blood. For 7 years, I took a lie for the truth and turned it into decree." The pause was short. "I'm not here to explain to you how I found out. I'm here because I need to tell you, to your face, that I understand." "Understand what, exactly?" He looked at me. He didn't look away. "That I tore from you the one thing no one had the right to tear away." His fingers tapped lightly on the table. "Once. And this doesn't have the name of a mistake. It has the name of a crime. What I did to you." I felt something hurt deep in my chest, but I kept my face steady. I had rehearsed that conversation for 7 winters. "You believed planted evidence?" I said, slowly, without asking me once, without letting me finish a sentence. "You heard me cry on the other side of the door, and called me a traitor, because it was easier than admitting you'd been deceived." "Yes." "You had me taken from the hospital before I could nurse him." "Yes." "You took custody of him with the same pen you used to order men killed." "Yes," he said for the 3rd time, more slowly, as if each letter cost something. I stayed silent. He didn't look away. I thought he'd want to flee from my gaze, but Santino held every second, and that hurt me in a new way. It was easier to hate a man who couldn't face me, harder to hate one who accepted the weight. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness like someone asking a favor," he continued. "I know forgiveness isn't a courtesy you hand over. It's a decision that's earned. I'll earn it, or I won't. But I won't rush you." I gripped the cloth harder. That sentence was mine. It was exactly how I had decided to respond if he ever dared to show up there. And he had said it before me, in his own voice. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I was a coward. And because until last week no child had looked at my chest as if I were safe. Because I saw you sing and I saw my son stop crying. And it was at that moment that I understood that it had never been about betrayal. It was about something I didn't control. And I pretended for 7 years that I controlled it." The old woman with the newspaper turned the page. The sound of the pages seemed deafening. "It's not enough," I said, low. "Understanding isn't enough. I know. Destroying whoever lied for you isn't enough. I know. Coming here without security, with that look on your face, thinking it counts as proof, isn't enough. I know, Allegra." His voice cracked a little on my name. It was the first thing I'd seen crack in him in all those years. "That's why I came without knees, without lies, without a big promise. I just came to tell you what it is." I swallowed hard. I looked at the fogged window. "There's something I want," I said. "Say it. I want to know him, truly know him. Not as the lady from the restaurant, as a mother. I looked into his eyes. The one who'll tell Emilio who I am is you. It won't be me. It'll be you. With your own mouth. At the moment, I decide. He swallowed hard. Yes. And if he doesn't want me, I continued, and my voice wavered for the first time in 7 years. If he pulls away, if he prefers the nanny or prefers you, I won't make demands. I'll go back to my apartment and keep working here. Allegra. That's the rule. I gripped the cloth until my knuckles ached. I'm not going to steal anything from anyone again. I've already been robbed too much. He nodded slowly. He looked at his own open hands on the table. Can I ask you something? He said. You can. Did you have anyone to share these years with? I had longing, I answered without thinking. It has a good memory. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds. When he opened them, something in them had changed color. Tomorrow, he said. Early evening. Right here. I'll bring him. You close to the public. There's a piano. I want it to be where he first met you. All right. Santino stood up. So did I. The difference in height between us was still the same, but the air was not. It was as if he'd lost 3 centimeters in the last few days, and I had gained 2. Allegra, he said, before grabbing his coat, I won't touch you tomorrow. I won't try to embrace you. I won't reach out my hand to you in front of him. I want him to see that I don't own you. I want him to discover his mother standing on her own. The thing I'd been holding in my chest since his first sentence collapsed. I didn't cry. I left through the back door before he could see my eyes fill. I walked to the bridge over the river. The rain had thinned. I stood there for a stretch of time I couldn't measure, watching the dark water pass, letting the tears run without wiping them. I had waited 7 years to hear that man say I was deceived. I had waited 7 years to feel no victory at all when I finally heard it. Lena appeared behind me a few minutes later. She must have left the Verdi the moment she saw me cut through the back door and caught up with me on the riverside sidewalk. She leaned her arms on the railing beside me without saying anything for a whole minute. Then she draped her coat over my shoulders. Let's go home, she said. Lena, shut up. I'm not going to ask anything. I'm just going to take you. And she took me. Wednesday, early evening. I had told Aldo at lunchtime, and he had answered only with a nod and the place is yours. Lena washed the floor when she didn't need to, put those closed for renovations, sign outside, opened the piano, and disappeared through a back door without saying goodbye. I arrived half an hour early. I walked through the empty dining room, rested my fingertips on the cold keys. I had sworn to myself that I would never play the lullaby again until I knew he could hear it as a son, and the time had come. The doorbell rang. Santino came in first, with Emilio holding his hand. The boy had a little wool beanie on, cheeks red from the cold, curious eyes running over the dining room, like someone finding a familiar place strange without its people. Where is everyone? Emilio asked. Today's a different day, Santino answered, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. Today it's just ours. Emilio saw me. He smiled. He let go of his father's hand and came running, hugged my legs as if it were already an old routine between us. You were going to play for me, remember, he said, lifting his face. I looked over his head at Santino. He nodded once, his jaw locked like someone holding something big by a leash. I will, I said. I sat on the piano bench. Emilio plopped down beside me, knees bent, eyes shining. Santino stood a step behind, hands in his pockets, not touching either of us. I played the first notes. I didn't sing yet. I just played. Emilio closed his eyes. That sounds like when I was a baby, he said, and opened them again. It's not, but it sounds like it. I couldn't answer. I kept playing. The tears came without warning, ran quietly down my face, and I didn't take my hands off the piano to wipe them. Santino knelt down, not before me, before his son. He put a hand on the boy's small shoulder and made Emilio turn his face toward him. Son, yeah, Daddy. Do you remember I told you your mother lived far away, that she'd gone away before you were born? Emilio nodded. Serious. I lied to you, Santino continued, without fleeing. And I didn't lie because I wanted to hurt you. I lied because I was deceived by a person very close to me, and I believed something that wasn't true, and that thing made me do something very ugly. I kept your mother away from you. Emilio looked at me, then at his father, then at me again. She's my mom, he said, slowly. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. Santino nodded. She is. Allegra is your mother. She wanted to be with you from the very first day. The one who didn't allow it was me, and I was wrong. Emilio stayed silent. My eyes, His eyes slowly filled, but he didn't cry. He looked at me again and held out a hand with his fingers spread, like someone checking whether something is really made of flesh. I rested my face in the center of that small hand. "That's why you looked sad," he whispered. "That's why, my love," I answered. He clung to my neck, not like a child recognizing a face from a magazine, like a cub recognizing a scent. I felt his small weight all at once, all in me, for the first time. And there I cried without hiding it. I cried for the 7 years. I cried for the hospital. I cried for the sheets folded alone. Santino stayed kneeling beside the bench, his hand still on his son's shoulder, and didn't even dare touch me. I caught a glimpse that he too was crying in silence, with that frightening discipline of someone who learned far too young not to make a sound. We stayed like that for a stretch of time no one counted. Then Emilio pulled away a little, looked at me with a very serious face, the way only a 6-year-old can. "You can sing now?" he asked. I sang, softly, the whole song, from beginning to end. He leaned against my chest and listened like someone checking a memory stored in some old corner of the body. He didn't recognize it, but he quieted, and his quieting told me everything. When I finished, he was sleepy. He grabbed the coat that had fallen on the bench and covered my shoulders with it, in that clumsy way children have, and said, "Today you're not sad. Not today, my love." Santino stood up. He picked up his son's little wool beanie from the floor, put it on him carefully. He held out his hand to the boy first, and only then, in a contained gesture, held out his other hand to me. He didn't demand. He simply held it out. I looked at Emilio holding his father's hand, and holding the coat with the other as if it were mine, and I looked at Santino's open hand waiting in the air between us. Chapter 6. The Stone House by the Lake. I went back to the apartment alone that night, after the piano. Santino took Emilio home and left me at the door of the building without insisting on coming up. Before closing the car door, he said quietly that he had a house outside the city, far from the mansion, and that if I wanted, he would come get us in the morning. No rush, no obligation. I said yes, with a nod. Thursday morning. The city was still sleeping when Santino pulled the car up in front of my building. I came down with a single suitcase. It had taken me half the night to pack, and I had taken more things out of it than I'd put in. 7 years fit into a small suitcase when a person learns to live without much. Lena was at the window of her floor, 2 stories above mine. She waved from a distance, with that face only she makes, a mix of pride and threat. She had told me the day before that if he hurt me again, she'd handle him herself. I had laughed for the first time in months. Even now, going down the stairs with the suitcase bumping against the steps, the echo of that laugh still lingered in my chest like a forgotten thing you suddenly find again. "Good morning," Santino said, holding the car door open for me. "Good morning." Emilio was in the back seat, buckled in, his face pressed against the window. When he saw me, he broke into a full smile. "Mommy," he said. It was the second time I'd heard it. The first had been the day before, at the time of saying goodbye at the Verdi, when he turned from the door and shouted it from the middle of the street. I hadn't managed to answer at the time. Now I answered, "Good morning, my love." Santino drove. He had asked Bruno to come in a second car, behind, but only for emergencies. The main car came with just us, him in front, me in back with Emilio. It was the first time in 7 years that I saw him drive without anyone from the household in the passenger seat. The city was left behind. We traded the gray asphalt for the empty winter fields, then for the road that runs along Lake Michigan, then for a narrow gravel street I didn't know existed. Emilio fell asleep again partway there, leaning against my arm. I didn't move so as not to wake him. I felt his weight and held it in my chest the way you hold a lit candle against the wind, that sharp awareness that any wrong movement puts everything out. Santino watched me in the rearview mirror just once. He didn't smile, said nothing. He went back to looking at the road. The house appeared among the trees after a curve. It was gray stone, with a dark gabled roof and a thin chimney releasing a thread of white smoke. It had a low wooden porch with 3 stone steps leading to a small patio, and the patio ended at the lake. All around, tall pines closed off the property on both sides, muffling the wind and creating a silence the city didn't know. It was a house for ordinary people. It had no iron gate, no visible cameras, none of the smell of power that the Benedetti mansion carried in every room. "This is it," Santino said, stopping the car. I stayed a second without getting out. Emilio woke with the breaking, rubbed his eyes, and looked out the window. "Is it our house?" he asked. "It is," Santino answered. I neither corrected nor confirmed. I got out of the car. The lake air hit my face with a smell of pine and still water. I felt my lungs open in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Emilio got out running and went straight to the porch. He climbed the 3 steps, opened his arms, and shouted that this one would be his house forever. Bruno took my suitcase from the trunk, handed it to Santino without saying anything, and stayed by the car with his hands in his pockets, looking at the lake. He had understood without anyone needing to explain that this part of the story wasn't his. Santino opened the door of the house. He didn't push me inside, made no gesture of ownership. He just stepped aside and waited for me to pass first. I went in slowly. The living room was small. A stone fireplace in the corner, a wide gray fabric sofa, an old rug with beige and brown stripes, 2 armchairs with their backs turned to the lake. The ceiling was low, with exposed beams, and the dark wood floor creaked a little in the center. There was an upright piano against the back wall. I stopped in front of it. It was my grandmother's, Santino said, low, behind me. It was in a shed for 10 years. I had it restored last week. I rested my hand on the lid. The lacquer was new, but the wood underneath was old and dense. I pressed middle C carefully. The key gave way with the right weight, and the sound that came out was clean, without wavering. It was tuned. I felt, through that small gesture, that someone had taken care that it would be. Thank you, I said, without turning to him. Emilio came running from the kitchen. He had opened the refrigerator and discovered there was milk, and had opened a cabinet and discovered there were cookies. He was in ecstasy. He pulled me by the hand to the hallway to choose his room. I let him. He chose the middle one, which had a window facing the lakeside and a wooden chandelier shaped like a boat. My room was at the end of the hallway. It had a wide bed with a white linen bedspread, a low pine dresser, a reading chair by the window. On the dresser, someone had placed a ceramic vase with dry branches. The window faced the patio, and from that height I could see the whole lake, gray and quiet under the winter sky. It was simple. It was beautiful. I set the suitcase at the foot of the bed and stood for a moment in the center of the room, not quite knowing what to feel. Santino appeared at the door. He didn't come in. If you want to change anything, he said. It's fine. If you want a different bed, a different color, to take away the vase, take away the chandelier, it's fine, Santino. He nodded once and walked away. Lena arrived at the end of the morning, in her old car, bringing the boxes with the rest of my things and 2 bags of fresh bread from the Verdi. She climbed the 3 stone steps, looked at the lake from the top of the porch with her hand on her forehead making shade, let out a low whistle, and said, "That view is worth every single one of the 7 years of longing." She looked at me. I'm serious. Don't cry. I'm not crying. Yes, you are. But it's okay. So am I. She wasn't. Lena doesn't cry. But the way she said it made me laugh, and the way she hugged me quickly at the kitchen door without letting Santino see made me laugh again. She greeted Emilio with the familiarity of an old aunt, pretended not to recognize Santino, and left before lunch, saying she had a shift at the Verdi and that this house needed to learn to breathe on its own. The 3 of us had lunch in the kitchen. Santino had brought ready-made soup from a place downtown, and had heated it without burning it, which he considered a personal victory. Emilio ate 2 bowls. He talked the whole time, about the room, about the boat chandelier, about a stone he'd seen on the patio that he wanted to keep. Santino listened to him like someone who had never learned to listen, and was learning now, with that applied attention of someone who doesn't want to get it wrong anymore. I watched the 2 of them and felt something I had to make an effort to name. It was peace. Not trust yet, not loose love, but peace. In the afternoon, Emilio asked to swim. It was very cold. Santino, with a seriousness that made me hold back a laugh, explained to his son that the lake in January was a friend from afar and an enemy up close, and the 2 of them ended up making a snowman on the patio with stones for eyes and a thin twig for a nose. I sat on the stone step, with a blanket over my shoulders, and watched them from a distance. It was the first time in my life that I saw my son play with his father. The afternoon fell without warning. The sky turned orange for half an hour, and then went dark blue, and the lake reflected the blue as if it were another sky upside down. We went inside. We lit the fireplace. Emilio ate little, sleepy, and asked to sleep in his new room with the door ajar. I stood in the doorway for a while, watching his small chest rise and fall. 7 years. 7 years of not knowing whether he slept well, whether he was afraid, whether he cried in the dark asking for someone. I rested my forehead against the door frame and breathed deeply. letting the warmth of the house come in from within. Allegra, Santino had stopped a meter from me, without making a sound. He kept a respectful distance, like someone approaching a frightened animal who knows that any hurried step undoes everything. "He's sleeping," I said, without turning. I saw. We both stayed there, on the threshold of our son's room, listening to his breathing fill the silence of the house. The fire in the fireplace crackled at the end of the hallway. The lake lapped gently against the patio stones. It was a sound I didn't know yet, and that promised to become familiar with time, like certain voices that enter slowly, and one day you realize you can no longer imagine silence without them. Santino turned his face toward me. I turned mine toward him. We both had tired eyes, and we both had something in them that wasn't hope yet, but was close. He held out his hand slowly. He didn't touch me. He stopped in the air, 2 fingers from my arm. "May I?" he asked. It was the simplest word in the world. I had never heard it from his mouth in all the time we'd known each other. I felt my chest tighten with a force that wasn't pain, but resembled it. "You may." He rested his fingers on my arm, over the fabric of my blouse. Just his fingers, without grabbing, without squeezing. It was the touch of someone checking whether the other person is really made of flesh, the way Emilio had done the day before with his open hand on my face. I raised my hand and covered his fingers with mine. It was a small request, and he understood it. He brought his face closer slowly. I saw it coming. I didn't look away. The kiss was singular, short, dense enough to hold within it everything that didn't fit in any word. I closed my eyes. I felt his breath meet mine, the smell of pine on his coat, the roughness of his chin after 2 days without shaving. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine for a second and nothing more. "Good night," he whispered. "Good night." I went into the room. The door closed between us, slowly, and I heard his footsteps go down the hallway until they stopped at the threshold of Emilio's room. I woke with the cold light coming in through the window and drawing a long stripe on the wood floor. The house was silent. I put on my robe, opened the bedroom door, and followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen. Santino was standing by the stove, dressed, stirring a cup with a spoon. He had slept on the living room sofa. I saw the folded blanket over his arm. When he saw me in the doorway, he smiled a small smile. In that way, he didn't know he was learning to do. "There's coffee," he said. "I think." "You think?" "I put in too much water. I put in too little water. I put in more. It's drinkable, in my opinion, but I'm biased." I laughed softly. I sat on the bed, pulled the blanket over my shoulder, took the cup. It was too strong, but it was drinkable. I looked at him over the rim and held back a laugh. "You need to actually learn." "I'm actually learning." Before I could answer, Emilio burst into the room with his face creased from sleep and the previous day's little wool beanie on his head, as if he'd slept with it on. He jumped onto the bed between the two of us, without ceremony, lay on his back, opened his arms, and said that from that day on, this was how the mornings happened. Santino and I looked at each other over his head. I set the cup on the little table. I kissed my son's forehead. I stayed lying there a while longer, feeling his small weight on my right side and Santino's warmth on the left, without touching. Later, I put on my coat and took the cup of coffee outside. I sat on the stone step of the patio, the middle one, the coldest. The lake was still. The sky was gray with no promise of storm or sun. It was a sky that said nothing. I held the cup between my hands, feeling the warmth of the stoneware pass through the wool of my gloves. I thought, for just a second, a thought that came without warning. Can a man capable of taking everything from a woman really learn to simply stay? I heard Emilio laugh inside, loud. In that way children laugh when someone does something very silly in front of them. I heard Santino's voice answering, lower, with a humor I didn't know he had. I drank the coffee. It was too strong. I got up and went back inside. The door of the house closed behind me. Outside, the lake remained still, mirroring a sky that promised nothing. Lena here. That wraps up Book 1, and I've already finished Book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I thought we had finally found peace. Emilio slept in the next room, his chest rising and falling at a calm rhythm under the blue blanket. Santino had cooked for us that night, his hands still smelling of garlic and promises, trying to be the man he swore he had become. I almost believed it. I almost let the weight of the old scars melt in the heat of his body against mine. Then the silence woke up. The empty room, the blanket thrown on the floor. No sign of a struggle, just the teddy bear fallen on its side, as if someone had picked up my son while he slept. Santino appeared behind me, his face pale. But the look, that old look came back. The one that saw me as a threat. As if my presence there, trembling in the doorway, were proof that I had betrayed everything again. He took a step back when I tried to touch his arm, his voice low and cutting. "What did you do?" In the middle of the despair, I watched the house's camera footage for the second time. I froze on the exact frame where a familiar shadow crossed the hallway. The way the hand hesitated on the doorknob. The gleam of a ring I knew very well. Someone who had always been too close. Someone inside the house. My stomach turned. The walls seemed to close in. Santino was watching me now as if I were the poison he had always feared. What if I trusted the wrong person all along? What if the price of our peace was my son? What if Santino can never look at me again without seeing the traitor? Who took Emilio? And why do I feel that the worst is still to come? Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to Books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a Book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.